Welcome back to Alberta Primetime, and on tonight's focal point, Alberta gangster rap videos glorifying drug dealing and murder on the internet. Graffiti is against the law. Should we deal with local gang-style music? We'll also discuss funding cuts to so-called restorative justice alternatives with our Wednesday crime panel. Defence Lawyer Rod Gregory in with us tonight, youth justice advocate Mark Charrington, and Calgary Herald crime reporter Jason Van Rassel. Good evening, everyone.
Hello. Hello.
Well, it's one thing when American musicians rap about drugs, gangs, and guns on MTV, but what do you think of videos like this one? It begins with the Edmonton skyline and recognizable landmarks. It is clearly made in Alberta.
Enough with the gun shit. Go hard only if the money's fucked with. It's all mine. 09, all grind. I cut coke and bag leaves like it's fall time. Don't worry what Bobby pay. I don't cook, but my chef like Bobby Flay. On the grill with krill.
What do you think? Let's ask our panelists. Mark, we're spending billions of dollars fighting drugs, trying to get kids not to join gangs. You've dedicated your life to keeping kids out of that kind of a world. Do we need to do something about videos like these? Should we tolerate it?
Well, it is alarming, but I think we are doing something. I mean, this has been sort of part of social media for as long as there's been social media. You know, it's appealing to like the 12 and 13-year-olds that are sort of in marginalized families that don't have a lot of hope, and they see this and they're drawn towards that kind of bling.
40, 60,000 views. I mean, somebody's watching them.
Yeah. I mean, there's also another aspect of this is that, you know, it's sort of like this whole genre of music, gangster rap, and a lot of people that are watching this realize that it's the same as watching 3 6 Mafia and Notorious B.I.G.
But
Tupac.
You talk about the vulnerable kids, and those are the ones that you're trying to keep safe.
Yeah, and we need to realize that it's there. We can't change that, so we have to deal with that in a positive way. So we look at places like iHuman Studios that has a hip-hop studio that are also putting out those same sort of gritty videos, except with a positive message about social injustice.
We'll talk more about that program in a little bit. Let's first deal with some of these videos that are, as I said, made in Alberta. It's one thing when it's Hollywood or New York, but I mean, this is right in your backyard, very accessible, very real. Rod, are such artistic expressions a social concern? I mean, obviously you can't outlaw these things, but do they thwart anti-gang initiatives? Should we address them somehow?
I think it's a freedom of speech issue, and I would be very reluctant to interfere with restricting that kind of access. Really, people just shouldn't watch those types of messages, and the more attention that's given to them in some ways, the worse it is. I don't know if YouTube can monitor that kind of thing or whether they choose to. I agree with Mark that there are overwhelm kids with the positive messages and really address the drug issues, but I really don't see restricting these kinds of videos as the solution.
Jason, there are some of the meanings in the lyrics that most of us might not understand. 8 balls referred to, that's basically 0.5 gram
3.5 ounces of
pieces of crack cocaine. We'll just run through them for a second because we've got graphics for people. Pieces of crack cocaine that total 1/8 of an ounce. Each piece is a spitball. Ice bath and I air it out. Another line in the video, that's a step in the coke to crack cooking process. Got the E for the ravers. That's talking about ecstasy, which can be sold at places like West Edmonton Mall or big parties, concerts. Lookouts with binoculars, 1 step ahead, good luck stopping us. Basically, police lookout. So all of the references are there, and the video, for kids especially, it's cool. Is it a problem? Is there anything we can do about it aside from what our other panelists have said?
It's disappointing, I suppose, that someone has chosen to express themselves artistically with such a negative message, but I think it's, I don't really think it's cause for a moral panic. Now, maybe I'm dating myself here, but you know, I go back to the days when I was young and there was all that talk about playing heavy metal records backwards and secret messages from the devil being contained in them. And, you know, I really think that we have to be careful when we talk about how much messaging and music like this can influence young kids. You know, I don't think gangsta rap produces young gangsters, nor do I think that gangster rap is always being produced by gangsters. You know, this is a video that certainly depicts a lot of the drug culture, but whether the guy who's behind it is actually involved in that subculture himself or not, we don't know.
Right.
You know, gangsta rap started out as a very genuine, gritty phenomenon from some of the U.S. inner cities. People were involved in the drug culture, taking it out from the underground and rapping about their experiences. But when those guys became commercially successful, they ended up spawning a bunch of imitators that really had no kind of background of that sort. We don't really know enough about this particular individual to know whether he's an actual gangster himself or just a comfortable suburban kid who's made a glamorous video about it.
And as Mark's pointed out, there are lots of others. Mark, we do want to make time to let you talk a little bit more about an Alberta initiative, iHuman, that takes this kind of desire to do this and spin it in a positive way.
Yeah, well, they look for kids that are involved in street life, that are involved in gangs, and they engage them and they say, well, you know, why don't you check out our studio and look at the positive aspects, make a real message, make something about your situation, about having no food, nowhere to live, no supports, and make it angry and make it gritty, but you know, make it truthful. And that's the more realistic situation of the youth that we are dealing on the streets.
And that's called iHuman, funded by the province?
Yes, it's funded by the feds, the province, and the city. We get a lot of support, and they're an amazing organization. And you know, this guy that's doing this other video, I mean, kids on the street know that he's not real. I mean, drugs is about money. And you're not going to, what they say, heat bag yourself, you know, and
attract attention.
Yeah, and they're calling him like a poser or a wannabe because, you know, that's not what drugs is about. Drugs is about making money, and you don't sit there and advertise yourself to the police that.
Well, we've got more to talk about on the crime panel. Restorative justice being cut next. Alberta Council's funding for an alternative sentencing. Was the pilot program working? Should it stay? Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Wednesday Crime Panel. The Alberta government is cancelling $351,000 in annual funding for restorative justice programs operated by a dozen nonprofit agencies around Alberta. Mark, you started 2 committees on restorative justice, Justice Girls and YRAP, which are in Edmonton. The concept gets criminals and their victims face to face. Do all victims want that, though? Is that fair to victims? Some might never want to be in the same room.
No. A lot of victims don't want to be part of that. And that's the part of restorative justice, that you respect that. You don't want to re-victimize a victim. So the worst thing that you can do is sort of bully a victim or try to strong-arm them to be part of a process that they don't want to be. So usually there's a letter sent out saying, you know, that this is the situation, you know, your input would be valued.
Would you like to?
Would you, and can you bring some supports? And it goes from there into a conversation. And there's a motivation both from the victim and the offender to really want to meet each other and explain what happened during that incident. And usually the offender, you know, wants to apologize sincerely and say, you know, I've caused some harm, I want to help.
Do you see real human impacts, real resolution for people emotionally?
Oh, a lot more than you would in the court process. You mean, you're sitting 5 feet away from someone that you might have murdered their son or stolen something very valuable and sentimental from a loved one, and there's that raw energy, and you have to channel that energy, hurt that's been caused, but also how do you repair that harm, and how do you move forward?
And it's more often, I suppose, for things like graffiti, vandalism, theft, as opposed to murder.
Oh yes, no, I mean, a lot of it is used for sort of like summary offenses, but where you see its real impact, and where I've seen the real impact, is when there's been serious crime, because those are the answers that are never answered. Rod, you're on the board of the Alberta Conflict Transformation Society, and that's another restorative justice program. The Alberta Restorative Justice Association says 88% of offenders involved comply with the conditions imposed on them, but what are those conditions? Are they escaping appropriate sentencing by just getting to sort of sit down and say, I'm sorry?
Well, as Mark said, it's a very interactive process, and it's an excellent process. So once that process is finished, a report is sent to the judge. So typically a person has already pled guilty. So there is no promise held out to them in any way whatsoever that they're going to get a lesser sentence or more lenient sentence if they participate.
So the court still sentences?
The court still sentences the individual, and there's no promise of any lighter sentence or anything like that. My experience sitting as a board member and also as a defense lawyer, where I've had clients go through this process, is it's a real sincere outreach to a complainant or victim in a crime. I've had clients who've asked to do it, and the complainants haven't wanted to participate, as Mark has said. But I have some cases now where there are 2 or 3 victims, and everyone's going to sit down and they all want to participate.
And so the idea is that can maybe, especially for the offender, change someone's life.
It gives the victim some understanding as to what motivated the person to have done what they did, where, when, and why. And
for the offender?
It's equally as good because, as Mark indicated, it gives them a chance to apologize.
People aren't using it, like you said, to try to sway the judge?
I really don't think so. I've never seen anyone use it for that purpose, and everyone's pretty sophisticated in the process, victims included. And so a judge and a prosecutor aren't going to be fooled by an insincere ploy to try to get a lighter sentence.
Jason, in cutting restorative justice funding, the Solicitor General cites challenging economic times and the need to concentrate taxpayers' money on core programs at perhaps $3,000 per case, and maybe that's for things like donuts and facilitating victims' transportation, things like that. Do we even know, though, how it compares to the savings by not using the courts? Do we even know whether it's better to go with restorative justice on a fiscal scale?
And that's just it. You know, one could argue that this is a government that's being penny wise and pound foolish. We're talking about $350,000 that have been cut from the budget, and this is a department though that has the Solicitor General Department that has a budget of about $600 million. So that's a really small fraction of their budget. It's kind of a puzzling move and kind of counterintuitive, it seems, because the provincial government, probably more so in the last few years, has really put an emphasis on crime prevention programs and these sort of community-based programs, to try and sort of be more preventative and more proactive as opposed to reactive. So it was really kind of puzzling to me that they went and cut this program, because this government probably, in fairness to them, has focused on prevention measures and community justice measures more than any provincial governments in the recent past.
Right. Mark, what about recidivism? Is there any data on whether restorative justice keeps offenders from repeating?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different arguments regarding recidivism. I mean, the whole idea of restorative justice is to deal with the systemic issues, to put some supports, to deal with the issue that caused the crime. And if you can successfully deal with that through finding a young person a place that's safe to live, to ensuring that maybe he's enrolled in school and someone monitoring that, then the chances of that young person reoffending is diminished because you're putting in protective factors. But, to say, everybody that's going to go through is going to do a 90-degree turn and become, crime-free is foolish. And the literature is sort of on both sides of that. And depending on what kind of offense you're dealing with, if you're dealing with obviously the more serious offenses, I would argue that the recidivism rate is down. But if you're dealing with things that are spontaneous, that have to deal with addictions, then, it's a slow turn.
We just have another minute left, but Rod, I wanted to ask you about selling this to people. A lot of people don't understand it, maybe haven't felt the impacts of it, and we've got a federal government that's pursuing a tough on crime set of legislation, series of legislation. Is it a tough sell?
Well, it is a tough sell, and I think it's so hypocritical of the government. I feel so strongly about this. I think it's reprehensible. The board that I sit on, they don't just do work in the court systems, they do work in schools, they do work in communities. It's not just criminal offenders. Bullying in schools, conflicts.
And do they have credentials? Are they experts?
Absolutely, they're all trained, and the judges are on board, the prosecutors are on board. My board has an ex-school board trustee, police officers, defense lawyer, prosecutor, and we can see the results, and we see how many volunteer hours that go into it, and it's decimated. And
well, the Solicitor General has said that there's a chance that they could fund it again in the future, so I suppose that there's hope. I know we're out of time, but we're glad that you could educate us a little bit on it tonight. Thank you all for your insight. Thank you. Defence Lawyer Rod Gregory, Youth Justice Advocate Mark Charrington, and in Calgary, the Herald crime reporter Jason Van Rassel, all joining us this evening. Tomorrow on The Vocal Point, addiction is not bad behavior, lack of willpower. It's not even caused by emotional issues. It's being ruled a chronic brain disorder. What do you think? We'll ask our Thursday health panel.